Good afternoon, this is Gary Kavanagh here today on TRSI. I'm here today with my friend and colleague, Michael Dwyer. Michael, how have you been this week?
Doing very well, Gary. Thank you. And how are you?
I'm good. I feel I put a weird intonation on part of that sentence, but it's too late to go back now, so we'll just move forward. Michael, I have good news this week. If you recall, one of the weeks we were away, there was a great hope that no news would develop, and there was a coup in Russia. And I've got to say, Michael, we may have missed him on the way up, but we certainly caught him on the way down. Because the man who led that coup hit the ground, along with the rest of his plane.
Coup is a rather a big word for what it was. In fact, at the end of it all, we weren't really terribly sure what in fact it had been. But I think most people in the end decided it wasn't really a coup, but more a move in a series of business negotiations involving the various people involved in the business that we call Russia Inc. But yes, I was listening to the diplomatic correspondent from the Times talking about this, and he said he wouldn't be taking out too many insurance policies on the life of Mr. Prigozhin at that stage, that he didn't expect him to stay in the land of the living for too much longer. He said, it turns out I was rather precipitate. It took rather longer than I thought it would, but there you go. In a tragic and unexpected accident, Prigozhin, I'm going to say leader, CEO, manager, whatever, of the Wagner Group, which is, as we know, very important to the Russian economy and particularly to its global diplomatic outreach. It's involved in 17 different African countries. Has died in a error. It's not yet clear, Gary. Is it? Well, lots of things are not clear, and probably never will be until we get into the whatever the modern day version of the KGB files are. What indeed happened. But for example, we don't really know yet how the plane fell from the sky, do we? I mean, we don't know, for example, if it was a bomb on the plane or if it was taken down by some form of missile attack.
The original reports were that it had been shot down by a missile defense battery, which would obviously be state-controlled infrastructure in Russia. Subsequently, there seems to be a bit of doubt about this, whether or not the plane exploded due to a bomb. I have heard some people suggest that it would be very silly for a man who attempted a coup, even a low-fat or zero-carb coup, as he may have attempted, to get onto a plane in Russian airspace, and therefore he may have been dead before he got on the plane. Other people are saying, well, maybe there's a small chance he's not actually dead because this is Russia and very strange things happen there, and he simply may not have been on the plane. I think at last glance they had not found his body, which is hardly surprising, consider the, plane crash. But it appears that the now fictitious head of the Wagner Group and former caterer to the stars is dead. You've got to admire a man who was able to turn a catering company into effectively becoming a warlord. Like, that's a career jump.
Yeah, I heard a Russian commentator discussing that precise evolution, and he said that he was a man who had come out of prison at this age. He had spent quite some time in prison, if I remember, and came out and he started doing catering, as you say, to the stars. So he would be part of event organizing, and as he got more and more involved in the event organizing, he realized that there was also increasingly a need in Russia today for people with money to have security. So he started to do catering and security. And over time, he realized he was making an awful lot more money out of the security. And then he thought, you know what, we could do this in a bigger scale. Because lots of people hanging around in Russia, not much money, but had some fairly substantial military experience and training, and were willing to maybe do things that other people weren't willing to do, and so was born a Wagner. So basically, starts off as as a guy with a chipper and a couple of bouncers, if you like, and ends up with this private army. Now, the first thing, the thing about how it fell from the sky. The initial reports was that it had been intercepted by a missile, and that would seem to suggest, in an absolute sense, there's no way this could happen without the assent and the permission, or indeed the will of the very, very top of the state. Whereas if it was a bomb state, but isn't there something absolutely? I mean, everything about this is both banal and extraordinary. It's extraordinary also that we are so kind of, oh well, there you go. That's not a surprise. that this is our reaction to this. But when you actually take it out of itself and start to look at it, it is remarkable. The idea that you shoot a plane out of the sky in your own country, in your own skies, and let it fall to the earth. What to be so blasé about that?
I have actually seen some analysis suggesting that while I think the immediate reaction of everyone was that Putin had done this, there is an argument being made now that it may not, assuming it was what it appears to be, may not have actually been ordered by Putin because there was still some use to Prigozhin that had not been wrung out of him. And that Putin, if he was going to do this, would have waited. We will see. Did you see the comments Putin made about him? He was a man with a difficult fate, and he had made serious mistakes. Which, again, is not the quote of a person you hear and say, definitely didn't have that person killed.
You referenced, there were some theories that maybe he was dead before he got on. Apparently, there were, in fact, two different Wagner planes that took off going from St. Petersburg to Moscow, and that maybe he was dead before God, or in fact, maybe he didn't get on the plane at all. Not crazy people, but serious people, I've heard say that while they're 95% convinced that, he is dead, that they wouldn't discount a 5% possibility that, in fact, that this is some kind of weird operation and that Prigozhin is, in fact, not dead, but is, as we speak, maybe going off to somewhere in the far east of Russia, or possibly heading for some nice little island in the Caribbean, where with possibly Brazil, maybe get some proper, kind of face-off surgery, kind of Nicolas Cage kind of thing. But Gary, is there not something that we're reflecting on? The fact that we are now quite blasé about the idea that the state, the nation of Russia, is run by people for whom political murder is just one of those basic, ordinary tools that you use in your day-to-day management of the state. Remember, we referenced some time ago the case of a young woman banker. I think she was only 28. She was vice president of a not very massive bank in Russia, and she fell out of the window of her apartment, whatever she was, 10 floors up, and died. And it's a horrible, tragic fate for the woman. But that when you're getting to that level of micromanagement with murder, I think that you're not really dealing with a regime that is going to that you can really say is going to behave in a way that is normal and predictable, rational, according to the way we understand how states act. And without getting into the rights and the wrongs of the state, of how the state of the war in Ukraine today and how it should evolve, and whether more support should be given, or whether pressure should be applied, and whether we should be looking for an off ramp, if indeed there is an off ramp. I don't see that how you can be genuinely sanguine about engaging in negotiations with a regime like this and expect that the thing is going to be a normal negotiation where at the end of it you sign a document and everybody says, oh, it's all done and dusted, and then have any kind of faith that these people are going to behave in a consistent, legal and rational manner afterwards. I think there's a terrible level of old-fashioned liberal optimism about that worldview.
Well, on your point about a state developing to the point where it's willing to use murder to solve its problems, I'd make the point that outside of the modern state, that has been the approach of not just states, but kingdoms and various leaders for quite a long portion of human history. It was generally accepted that leaders could.
That's not my point. My point is not that that states will use murder. Of course, states have used murder. I am sure there are democratic states have used it. My point is that this is a regime for whom state murder, has become an everyday commonplace tool. It's one of the ordinary things on your desk. There are a set of buttons. Okay, we'll get him sent to the gulag. We'll get Howard sent to the psychiatric prison. We'll get him sent to the ordinary prison. And we'll get him thrown out of the 14th floor of his apartment building. It's become almost like a really bad black joke. The level at which, and the speed and the normality with which that they are willing to go to this kind of state murder, when they have all sorts of other tools available to them if they wanted to. But it feels like that's that kind of stuff. It's well, do we want to know? This is easier.
There's a Wikipedia page actually. You might like, Michael.
Yeah.
And it's just called "Suspicious Deaths of Russian Business People, 2022 to 2023." Now, I would make the point that at the point you don't have one page anymore, you have to start dividing it by year. But a lot of them did not fall out of windows, although you would think it's gotten to the point at this time where you just wouldn't want windows in your house above a certain level. Yeah, make them work for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh no, well, poisoning. We know that they use poisoning. Them. Do you remember there was that? Was it Anna Provoskaya? Am I getting that right? She's a very important, very courageous journalist, and because this has been going on a long time, the security services poisoned her, and there was a number of them they poisoned. I'm not sure in her case, but certainly a number of them they poisoned with this radioactive isotope. And the thing about it was absolutely a statement murder because it was an incredibly expensive way to kill somebody. Do you remember? I mean, we're talking more. I think it's more than a decade ago. I don't know if you remember the stories, but the numbers they were talking about how much it cost to generate this stuff and to get it in and to use it. It was really, really expensive. Anna Provoskaya, they actually murdered on Putin's birthday. It was, in fact, a birthday present to the president. Now, I absolutely understand that in the past, and not just in the past, in certain parts of the world, that the use of violence against citizens and subjects was a fairly normal thing. But I'd argue even then that when it became this at this level and this arbitrariness, you are talking about people who had departed from the normal path. I mean, even in medieval England and medieval France, there still were laws, there were still rules, and there were, if nothing else, there were social conventions that normal kings, emperors, dukes, and marquises did adhere to. I don't that this there do not seem to be very many rules left, at least not many that I can understand. Then again, I am not within that system.
And you are a notable cynic, Michael.
Am I a barking dog? Maybe I am.
Sometimes, Michael, people just fall out of windows.
Sometimes people just fall out of windows. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
Very often they leave suicide notes as well. Yeah. So, no need to look into that anymore.
Also, I mean, we were talking before, I mean, the point that several people were making about finding the body or if it was the body had been identified. Really? That's your thing? That it's all going to be based on, they found a body and it's been identified. So we know for certain. Like in Russia, they wouldn't be capable of getting a body from somewhere. That the guy who's involved in doing the autopsy and the people that are involved in identifying him couldn't be told this is Prigozhin. And that when they sent say a tissue sample away to the labs to be identified for DNA, that they're not going to come back with the answer that Mr. Putin et al. Are desirous of. I don't think the presence of one body or 100 bodies would make any bit of difference if that indeed was the case, that the body was not in fact Prigozhin.
Actually, looking at this list of suspicious deaths, shocking amount of people found dead with their wife and children. Also, these people fall down a lot. Not just off balconies, occasionally off boats.
Boats, yes. And drown.
In at least one instance, fell down a flight of stairs.
No, if I'm moving to Russia, I'm definitely getting one of those. I'm getting a bungalow dacha.
Dmitry Pavochka burned alive after falling asleep with a lit cigarette.
Oh, God. Horrible.
That's either a terrible accident or a really bad way to murder someone.
And again, isn't that the point? That in a number of these cases, many of these cases, that the method of the murder is in fact is a large part of it. It's, like in those films, there are certain when the mafia was or organized crime was going to kill you, if they would send a message by the method of your execution, like they'd shoot your eyes out, or they'd shoot you in the mouth and cut your tongue out, or you'd be found wrapped up with some item or a card or a note or something that was symbolic of something, that the reason why you've done. These are done to make statements. This is, in fact, Gary, this is a you could argue a very uh, a new, not a new level, but maybe a return to an old level of understanding the nature of deterrence within a criminal justice system. And they just told, go out, be creative, have fun with it.
Do you know, speaking of statement executions, Michael, do you know what one of the punishments that could be dealt out to you during the reign of Darius, King Darius, in the Persian Empire was?
Well, you're asking a big question there. Eastern potentates tended to be pretty creative with these things, and not just then. Go on.
So there was I believe it was either a judge or a regional official, a magistrate, who accepted a bribe. So, and Darius was very big, as you know, Michael, on a lack of corruption in the bureaucracy and impartiality.
Was this the man that was hungry for gold?
No, not that chap. What happened was he first appointed this chap's son to his position, so he was forced to resign. And then Darius had him flayed, and then decided that all new judgments in this region should be given while sitting on a particular throne, which was made out of this chap's skin. So basically, his son had to sit in a chair made of his father as a reminder that it would be very unwise to accept a bribe.
The Romans had a lot of very specific things. One of them, I can't remember, was it for forgery or perjury, where you were tied up in a sack with snakes and then thrown into the sea? There was another one where, this wasn't Roman, I don't think, somebody was found to be very hungry for gold, and they thought it would be a rattling good joke to get kind of a funnel and put the funnel into his mouth and down his throat, and then get molten gold and pour it into him.
Weirdly enough, Persians killed a shocking amount of people by pouring molten gold onto them.
Really?
Valerian, the Roman emperor. There's a story, I'm not sure if this is true, that he was captured by the Persians and he was kept as a personal slave of, I actually can't recall which Persian emperor it was, but eventually he got tired of him anyway and killed him with molten gold and then taxidermied him.
Oh.
And stuffed his body with straw and gold and then put it on display.
He was captured at the Battle of, God, I used to know the name of that battle. That was the only time that an emperor was captured in battle. It was against the Parthians, wasn't it? The Parthian Empire. The battle of, oh my goodness. Anyway, I think we should move on from the ingenious various ways that people have used to kill other people in the time.
Actually, just as an aside that might assume the listeners, I did the Gript live stream last week. And one of the responses we got was someone saying, I think they're like, that was very nice, but you'll never get anywhere with this sort of lowbrow and offensive joking about things like waterboarding. And I had made a comment about having John McGurk waterboarded. And I was asked, did I want to respond to this? And I said, well, no, because I don't think it's going to make him feel any better if I point out I wasn't joking.
Okay. Probably not. Your instincts were probably good on that one.
But keeping on the theme, Michael, of crime and punishment, interesting figures from the Dáil this week in relation to a PQ on recidivism.
Yes.
So Noel Grealish had asked for the recidivism rate within 3 years, which is basically the likelihood that a person will be arrested again for a crime within that period. Not that they commit a crime, that they'd be arrested for a crime. Very important distinction. And it shows that Ireland has a 3-year recidivism rate of about 61%, which is to say for every 10 people who go into prison, 6 of them will be arrested for another crime within 3 years. And we have a 47% 1-year recidivism rate, which again is to say nearly half of the people released from prison will within 1 year be arrested for another crime. And considering that the completion rates for a lot of crimes in Ireland are not very good. One would expect that most of these people commit multiple crimes before being picked up, which is a staggering dedication to criminality, Michael.
Also, cynical persons might observe also that it's not, at times it feels like it's not that easy for people to get into prison in the first place.
No, I think that is something worth mentioning. What I would like, and isn't in these stats, is, a follow-on, Michael. So it's great to know the recidivism rate is 40%. But if that were the case, and you would just cycle people through, eventually you'd cut that rate down. Just because there'd be less and less people in prisons. So what I'd be quite interested to see is, if you recommit a crime and get arrested once, how likely are you to do so again? Like, are we looking at a relatively small cohort of people here effectively working a Pareto Principle, where 20% of the country, or probably substantially lower, are most of the people committing crimes and most of the people in prison?
Well, I think we know that is true. I mean, what would be interesting to know is to know how true that is. Was it Patrick West did a piece on recidivism? Applying kind of a Pareto principle to crime. I think he was looking at figures in Ireland. And it was kind of staggering how much serious crime was committed by how few people. The other thing would be interesting to see also with the recidivism rates, that if you saw a decline, if you could graph a decline with age, if there was an association, and also with sex. I mean, I imagine from most of the statistics we have in the rest of most crimes, very much the large majority of crimes are committed by men, and certainly serious crimes, and they tend to be committed by young men. So it'll be interesting to see to what extent you could graph the fall off in recidivism with increasing age.
One of the things that came to my mind is when you read criminology works, one of the most commonly said things is that things like three-strike policies, where if you commit 3 crimes of a certain severity, you just automatically get a minimum sentence. It is exceptionally commonly argued that they don't work. The problem I found with the literature is that when you read it, a lot of it is quite emotional, nearly. It comes across that these are people who have a moral issue with this more than they have a policy issue with this. And the problem there is it's very easy to find stats to support whatever your moral issue is. As we were saying, Michael, one of the most commonly found results in criminology is that a small percentage of the population commit the majority of crimes. And you can see here a massive recidivism rate. So I don't know how you square either the findings as to who commits crime, most crimes, or these recidivism rates with an argument that longer sentences would not reduce crime. For the very simple reason that if 50% of people who leave prison are getting arrested again within a year, and let's say, Michael, this is just an ad hoc number. Let's say you're arrested, but maybe you committed 4 crimes, and it's the last one that you get caught on. Just keeping you in prison a year longer would stop those 4 crimes.
Now, those numbers on the face of it, Gary, not also make you wonder about to what extent the Pareto Principle is actually operative, because if you're seeing recidivism rates that are that high, that suggests that actually the criminal population is fairly widespread within the prison population. That it isn't, in fact. But if the Pareto Principle was reoperated, you'd expect that most people would leave prison and wouldn't commit crime again, but that there would be the small hardcore of people who are committing most of the crimes, because it's the number of crimes associated with individuals that gives this sense. But that the large majority of people would commit 1 or 2 crimes, but then would stop committing crime.
What I would say is actually happening there is that it probably is something similar to the Pareto Principle. For those who don't know, just to explain this, the Pareto Principle is the idea that if you look at it from a kind of an economics point of view, that in most situations, 80% of the productivity comes from 20% of the people involved in the activity. So that you have a small number of people who are very, very highly productive, and most people are a lot less productive. So in the set of 100 criminals, 20 criminals will be doing the large amount of the crime, and 80% of the criminals will only be doing a little amount. And in your office, 80% of the work will be done by 20% of the people. And the rest of the people will not actually be doing that much work.
20% of inventions or 80% of inventions will come from 20% of people and so on. So the actual number of people that are highly productive in any sector will actually be a small proportion of the people involved in the sector.
Yeah, so what I think might be happening is that is true on a population level. And then when you actually look at the recidivism rates, that most of the people in prison, Michael, and with a 3-year recidivism rate of 61% in 2017, which is the last year we have data for, this would appear to be true. I'd say most of the people in prison are habitual criminals.
Well, that could be simply the case. And it may be simply the case that if you're only an occasional criminal, that you're very, very unlikely to fall into the category of being in prison. And therefore, the kinds of people that end up in prison, the kinds of people who commit lots of crimes and knock up lots of convictions. I think you were saying about the moral element that people have, the objection that people have to the 3 strikes and you're out kind of thing, is that they tend to be perceived as, and they can function as, rather blunt instruments. So, for example, you had states in the United States, say, where if you committed 3 felonies, then that was 3 strikes and you're out. But there's a huge differentiation within the category felony. So a murder is a felony, but also stealing, in the best traditions of the Dickens novel, stealing a loaf of bread could well be also a felony. So your you might do 2 serious crimes, and then on one particular day you go into your local supermarket and you steal a loaf of bread and you're caught and you're convicted, and that's a felony. And for stealing the loaf of bread, you end up getting 25 years in prison. And the sense was that this was wildly disproportionate and productive of outcomes which were basically unjust. So that moral sense that this is too blunt a tool to use against people that can end up having catastrophic consequences for rather minor actions.
Yeah, on the research on this, I would absolutely, if someone wants to make the argument that longer sentences are not the most effective way of dealing with this, I think that's a fair argument, that 3-strike rules are not the most effective way of dealing with this. Again, perfectly reasonable argument to make, but I have never been able to square the argument that they do not work at all when we know a small percentage of the population commits most crimes. These people are highly likely to reoffend, and also that one of the greatest predictors of crime when you've got a group together is age. People above a certain age tend to commit less crime. People age out of a lot of crimes, particularly crimes of a certain type. So I've never quite been able to square it, but it does seem like an incredibly repeated statistic. And I would point out here in relation to recidivism, we've been talking about, well, only a certain amount of crimes are actually reported to the police, only a certain amount are solved. So again, this is not people committing one crime when they get out. This is people committing however many crimes are required for it to be reported and solved and for them to be charged. And depending on the types of crimes you are doing, the completion rates there, the amount of cases that the guards actually solve, can be quite low.
Well, we had that discussion, didn't we, some time ago, about the completion rates here, which were not impressive, and particularly when you understood what actually completion meant. Completion did not mean arrest, trial, conviction, imprisonment. Something very different to that. So yeah, the completion rates were not reassuring.
So it would appear here we have a wonderful example of a small population of habitual criminals who, Michael, perhaps something should be done about.
This is not a new conversation. The conversation we've been having in the Western world for, 150 years or more probably. But anyway, the Leaving Cert, Gary, has come out, the results, and everybody's shocked and horrified that there is something called grade inflation. And I know that for people like me who did the Leaving Cert a very, very long time ago, and I got what was considered to be a kind of a decent Leaving Cert. It was very, very far from a stellar one, but a decent enough one. I got what I needed. What I needed wasn't much. But now they go gaily scattering. It's not even A's. They keep changing the names of things, Gary. It's very, very hard for old people like me you don't have A's anymore. You have H's and H1s and H2s. You used to have H3s, but you don't have H3s anymore. You used to have A1, A2, A3. But A's are gone. Now we have H's. And half the country, it seems to me, isn't doing Irish anymore. And when I say to people, but well, did you matriculate? And people don't matriculate anymore. There are thousands of courses out there. But everybody's very agitated about grade inflation. Are you worried about grade inflation, Gary? Happily willing to admit that having thought about this a little bit over the last little while. Okay, I put it this way. I start off with a story. Some years ago, I went back to do a master's, and when I was in college, you had to get to do a master's. You had to get a 2-1, I think it was, to get a grant, and you could do one with 2-2, but you wouldn't get a grant. But you wouldn't necessarily be accepted in to do a master's because there were far fewer courses available, and there were far fewer. The numbers of students were much lower, etc. So when I went back to a master's, I said to the head of the department, rather, by the way, I only have a 2-2, and she said to me, "Well, when did you do your degree?" I said, "Oh, back in whenever." And she said, "Oh, okay. Well, that counts as a first now." So I suppose my first point is that grade inflation, if it's happening, isn't just happening in the schools; it's happening across the board, and there are economic reasons for it. I mean, what I'm told, this may be true, this may not be true. I was told by somebody in the business that one of the reasons is, they have these university rankings now, like they have school rankings, which are based simply on the number of people you can get from your school into a university or into a degree course. University rankings where they rank the various, and one of the factors that they use is the number of graduating students who achieve first class honors degrees. So if you care about rankings, and they do, because rankings are one of the things that people use when they try to decide which university to go to or which college to go to. So there is actually an active economic incentive in having a higher proportion of your students going out with higher class degrees than lower class degrees, because that puts you up the rankings. But as regards the Leaving Cert, it seems to me that once upon a time, getting a Leaving Cert just by itself was an achievement, and it would grant you access to certain kinds of employment. A lot of people didn't have Leaving Certs. People had Intercerts or Junior Cert, not what now Junior Certs, or what they call, there was once a thing called the Group Cert. The Leaving Cert was not that common, and it by itself was something. And people would ask, what did you get in your leaving? And what you got would be an issue regarding whether or not how you did in your interview, or whether or not you might get a particular job. But isn't it the case right now, Gary, that the Leaving Cert is fundamentally simply a sorting process for the CAO to distribute places at third level? And if that is the case, then it doesn't really matter, or that I can see, am I missing something here, that there is grade inflation, because in the global figures will be sorted out, and they will still have a hierarchy from top to bottom. And using that hierarchy, they will sort the places. So maybe once upon a time you could get into medicine if you had 5 Bs, right? Now you have to get 6 H1s to get into medicine, and you have to do an interview. But the number of people achieving the proportion of each individual set of results will still be basically the same year in, year out. There will be some variations between years. Basically, you'll have a similar kind of a distribution pattern of results. And all it means is that the people at the top will be the people who got the highest results, and so it will filter down. So if the Leaving Cert is fundamentally just simply a sorting mechanism for the distribution of places in third level, really matter, does it? Or am I missing something here? Sorry.
Perhaps you can explain this to me, Michael, because I'm actually not terribly familiar with this story. I read that the minister had stepped in to ensure that the grade inflation continued after we brought in originally during COVID. But my question is this, Michael. Considering how the Irish education system works and how the point system works, and that the points are readjusted based upon the results in the year, what's the actual point of this policy? Because if you inflate everyone's grades, then the points to get into each course will presumably move up by the amount you have inflated it, unless you're already at the top, in which case it just means more people can get into the very top ranking courses. But it doesn't seem to serve any actual purpose.
I think your point is correct. In this, okay, if we put it this way, if one year, for whatever reason, the word goes out to the correctors across all the subjects, this year we're going to be really, really hard, and the number of A's declines, the number of B's declines, the number of C's declines, right? So the average points of the average number, the number of people that say get 600 points declines from 5% to 3%, and 5 to 80 goes down to whatever. What will happen is that a course which the previous year required 600 points to get into now will require 580 points or 560 points. The number of points required, this is as I understand it anyway, the number of each course will have what they call a numero clausus, a closed number. In universities on the continent, they have open numbers, and basically, as long as you've passed your state exam at some level, you can walk in and you can decide, I'm going to do medicine or I'm going to do engineering. And they use the university exams as the sorting mechanism. And even if you didn't get a great leaving cert, we'll say their equivalent of a great leaving cert, if you can consistently pass the university exams and then pass the professional exams at the end of it, they'll say, okay, you can be a doctor. You've passed the requisite exams. Away you go. Here we don't. We start the screening process, shall we say, earlier, because we've a closed number of places that are available, but all of those places will be filled. So if the average number of points available generated by the leaving cert declines, well, then the number of points required for a particular course in Trinity to do medicine or in UCD to do physiotherapy or whatever will also come down. I mean, the numbers will also come down if there is a decline in the request for that particular course, because that also happens, Gary. Remember that at different times, different courses will become more fashionable. They will be perceived as being more employment friendly, more remunerative, and then they will go out of fashion, and other courses will become more desirable, and because more people are applying for them, then the number of points required will increase for those courses. So why are they doing? I think with COVID, it was kind of done as a public reassurance mechanism, because we kept on being told about how stressed and how worried students were because they were being they weren't getting the normal kind of schooling. They were doing stuff online, and therefore we're going to have to create a less demanding exam because of the experience they'd had during COVID. And that wasn't just at shall we correction level, but also the exams were actually made, the choices were expanded, and the number of things you had to do that were mandatory was reduced, and so on. But it was basically, I think, kind of a reassurance mechanism. Listen, if we had somebody from the department here, or somebody from the teachers' unions, they might tell us that there was actually some kind of a specific practical purpose for this, but it seems to me that really it was a form of kind of reassurance. Why we kept it going, I'm not 100% clear on. The reporting is that the grades are up by an average of around 8% this year, and that was as a directive from the minister. I don't know. On a slightly tangential subject, it does seem to me that we constantly talk about the leaving cert, and I think there are aspects of the leaving cert that are actually positive. I mean, the fact that it is absolutely blind, as a mechanism, it is a completely blind sorting mechanism, is a very positive thing. The fact that teachers are not involved, and teachers don't want to be involved, even though there's strong pressure from the department and from the politicians, that more of the marking actually be done within the school rather than at the exam, because they don't like they think the exam, the pressure. I think constantly telling teenagers that they're doing something which is horrible and stressful and rotten and bad for them and bad for their mental health, which is what we do constantly. is not actually a very good way of dealing with this.
I think I have very little truck with a lot of the stuff about the leaving cert because I think, far from only parts of it being positive, I think quite a lot of it is actually positive. And I say that as someone who didn't do terribly well in the leaving cert because I had absolutely no interest in it, but a lot of interest in drinking. But you're right, it is a blind test, and we know from research in this, particularly in America, that one of the greatest things for social mobility of the poor is blind testing. Blind testing is immensely helpful for that because legitimately talented people come out on top. And for all the talk of, oh, well, the rich can get, they can get tutors, they can do all of these things, they do have an effect, but not as much as people think.
There's an argument also, Gary, to say that if we actually move stuff far more into school experience stuff, and that you actually you potentially may amplify the advantage to the children of the privileged classes over those who are more financially straitened, and that you actually end up with a perverse result. One of the things that sorry, I was just going to say that if you remember the PISA results, that I think the only occasion that I can remember coming across where Ireland actually came number one was joint first with Finland back in the early 2000s, and that was on the access that children had to a high quality of education, irrespective of where they lived. So it didn't matter if you lived in a poor or deprived part of the city, or if you lived in a rural area, that you could still easily access high quality education, and that was a really important and positive thing. Now that has declined. Now it may there's a correlation. It may not indeed be a causation, but I think it's interesting at least that has happened at the same time as we've seen a decline in the voluntary school sector. And I think there may be something to that. It might be worth somebody to go off and have a look at that. And the voluntary school sector is definitely not in good favour with those people who run Irish education policy and has not been for quite some time. Voluntary sector is mostly those schools that would have once upon a time been run by priests, nuns, and brothers, and tended to be more academic in their approach. But as you say, the blind test is one of the best and most successful ways that people can get out of where they are and advance economically, socially, mobily, whatever you want.
They are one of the strongest tools for social mobility that has ever been seen. It's why American universities are currently getting rid of them to the largest extent they can, because it turns out that if you allow the truly talented people to come forward, then, well, that has some, should we say, consequences for the makeup of your student body.
I wanted to mention one thing very, very quickly, was that while there have been issues regarding education in areas of deprivation, there have been significant improvements uh, in the DESH school system, which has been quite successful. A number of the programs they've used there, to say with literacy, numeracy, reading levels, and the scores in PISA have been good. And you have to say the scores that we get are pretty good, and they're more than pretty good. We get pretty damn good results across the board from our PISA in our PISA rankings, particularly when you consider that outside of Europe, I would take some of those PISA results with a large grain of salt.
Next, you'll be telling me that Cuban hospitals are not the apex of public health care.
Well, you remember what happened when they sent all those Cuban doctors to Brazil, don't you? Yeah, the Brazilians sent them back and said, no, 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 sorry, we're badly off for doctors, but we don't need these doctors.
All right, we will leave it there. We will be back next week. I believe the doll is sitting again within a small number of weeks, so we will leave this silly season behind, Michael.
No, we won't. We'll be in the sillier season. Far sillier when the doll is sitting. But anyway, we shall be back in social day.
All the best.